that's what's going to go down and be going. All right, so we need to get through all of this today. So let me just recap really fast from yesterday. We have Japan being very aggressive over there in the Pacific. We have Italy trying to take over northern Africa. They run into some trouble, have to have Hitler help them, but that's their whole focus. And we have Germany, as of yesterday, trying to take over lands, but they do it through occupation and annexation until finally September 1st, 1939, when they full-scale invade Poland. And they do so with the help of the USSR, and the USSR, after they get back their part of Poland, then later invades Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania to take back their part of the land that was taken from the Versailles Treaty. So that's more or less where we left off yesterday. So we have one last thing that happens after all of that, and that's to do with the U.S. So in 1939, the U.S. passes yet another Neutrality Act. So the 1935 Neutrality Act, that's the one where things were just starting to take off in Europe, and Japan is just sort of starting off. And so that kind of just declared that we're neutral and that we're not going to sell weapons to any of the countries at war. So even if you're the victim, we're not selling you weapons either. Then in 1937, we kind of revised it a little bit to include the cash and carry clause. And that whole thing was to belligerent nations like Japan, because they had just invaded China, I said that right this time, and to like Europe or Italy and to Germany, just to let them know that if you're one of these kind of aggressor nations, we're concerned. And so if you want to buy stuff from us, you need to come over here and buy stuff and bring cash, because if anything happens and you lose what's going on right now, we want to make sure that we don't lose our money. So we did that in 1937, but now the world is at war. England and France have declared war on Germany. Germany has declared war and taken over Poland. Italy is aggressively moving across northern Africa. Japan is aggressively moving across all the islands in the Pacific. And we're still like, we don't want a part of this. But at the same time, President Roosevelt is concerned. Like, he sees all of our, for hundreds of years, allies in danger, and he's worried about that, and he's worried about us. So we passed another Neutrality Act in 1939. And the biggest part of this is because England's fighting Hitler, and England's our BFF. So our concern is that England's going to be struggling with this, and we can't help them because of our Neutrality Acts. So 1939 changes things a little bit. It does lift the arms embargo against warring nations, so we can trade weapons to warring nations, but Congress wouldn't go along with that unless Roosevelt added that the only reason we would trade weapons with a country is if we felt we were in danger. So we're not just going to pick a side and say, oh, hey, England, we're going to trade you some weapons. It is in the Neutrality Act that we have to be in danger. Like, the U.S. has to be, like, in a position where our trade with this country is going to be for our self-preservation and protection. But at least it's been lifted so we can trade weapons in case that ever does happen. And for Miss Arango and her Arango Mango Company, in our last Neutrality Act, Roosevelt warned me that if I still want to go trade with like Egypt or anybody else, if I want to go trade my cool mango chairs that when you sit on them, they smell like mangoes. If I still want to trade them with like Spain, that's not on either side of anything, if I'm sailing in the war zone, it's on me. He made that very clear in the 1937. He can't stop me from going, but he's warning me that if I go and they attack me, it's my fault. The new Neutrality Act of 1939 says you can't go to belligerent countries. So from now on, I cannot go by law to trade with these countries. I can still trade with Spain, and I can still trade with other countries, but I cannot go to trade to these countries. They have to come to me. Cash and carry means I have to have them come to me. If Japan wants to buy my chairs, because Japanese people love the mango chairs, they have to come here and buy it from now on. All right, so now we get to 1940. So Germany, which has very successfully, very easily dominated Poland, is ready to move again. I mean, Hitler's plan of making his German Empire the greatest German empire the world has ever seen can't stop with, like, Poland. He wants more, and he's got the manpower to do it. France and England are still mobilizing for war. It is going to take them forever to draft troops, train them, and produce the weapons that they need. So he's got to move kind of fast, and he does. By February of 1940, Germany invades Denmark. Now, Denmark may seem like an odd choice. He has so many options, and he chose Denmark. But Denmark has been beginning to allow Jews to come in after the concentration camp things have gotten out, that this is what's going on, and this will stop that. Now, the Jews really aren't going to have many options of where to go if he takes over Denmark, which he did. But Denmark is not exactly prepared for this invasion, and they fall very quickly. Hitler immediately turns around, mobilizes his forces, and moves into Norway. Norway falls very quickly. He immediately moves into the Netherlands, which really didn't take very long, and then he moves into Belgium. And from Belgium, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to France. And by June, France falls. That means between February and June, he took over Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. And no one can stop him. That leaves England alone. And England's like, the reports we're getting from like France is, we're no match for him. And so England's calling us like, we need your help. You gotta come help us. And America's like, so not our problem. And Roosevelt's like, Americans don't get it. Like, it is gonna be our problem eventually. Like, we should help now. But Congress refuses. The American people, absolutely not. Like, we're not going through this again. So Roosevelt's hands are tied. There's really nothing he can do to help England, even if he wanted to. And he does want to. But there's not much he can do. So, Roosevelt's not done. He's like, okay, we have this, like, embargo thing that says, you know, we can trade weapons if American lives are kind of like, you know, in danger or whatever. He's like, so technically, without violating anything, I can trade, not sell, trade you some of our destroyers. Now that they have a navy, but this would just like boost their navy and help them transport troops to the European front. Our navy is like, yeah, you can't have any of our new ships. And Roosevelt's like, well, you have older ships. I mean, you've been building these newer ships. And the Navy's like, yeah, no, okay. So they agree to allow Roosevelt to trade 50 U.S. destroyers. They are older, but they're still battleships and still in good shape. So we're going to trade 50 U.S. destroyers for permission to build a U.S. base on English soil. That's our trade. Well, that's pretty cool. Soon after this, it's like, ring. Like, hello? Hello, it's Germany. Hitler wants to know. This is German accent. I hope I'm not offending anyone. Hitler wants to know, because you guys have stuff up for trade. If you would like, you'd be willing to trade with Germany. Like, we'll take 50 of your destroyers for permission to build, you know, a U.S. base on German soil. And we have a lot of soil now, by the way. So, what do you say? And Roosevelt's like, oh, wow, we only had 50. 50 for trade. And, you know, we already traded them. I'm so sorry. And he was like, oh, no, that's cool. You're still neutral, right? The United States does not choose sides. Okay. All right, so that happens, like, literally soon after this. In September of 1940, Roosevelt does something that no other president ever, to this day, has done. He starts a draft when we're not at war. A draft. Like, you guys turning 18 could get a draft notice in the mail. And America's like, you said you were going to keep us out of war. And he's like, I am. That's what I'm doing. Everyone's like, eh? And he's like, don't you see? Think about it. You're Hitler or Japan or any country. And you're contemplating, the United States. But here's the United States building this massive army. Wouldn't you think twice about attacking the U.S. if they built a massive army? And everyone's like, yeah, that does actually make sense. Yeah. He's like, it's a deterrent. Like, it will keep other countries from even thinking about attacking the United States if we already have. I'm not planning for us to go to war. I don't want us to go to war. I'm trying to deter other countries from thinking they can go to war against us. It's also election year. And everyone was like, that's so smart. Now, he was fortunate it did play in his favor. The election's in November. Oh, I'm sorry, wait, before I get to the election. You're Hitler. So you're like, okay, neutral America. So first of all, you are sending weapons to the only country fighting me, and now you're drafting troops. But you're not fighting for war. Hitler's like, you can play that game of deterrence. So Hitler, I mean, yeah, he's already buddies with Mussolini, but it's Mussolini. So he looks around, he's like, but Japan, man, Japan's where it's at. They got some power. So Hitler calls Japan, he's like, hey man, Have you been checking out what America's doing? And Japan's like, I don't know why Japan talks like that. We have. So Hitler proposes that they make an alliance with Japan. Whereas if, and this is very broad, very, very vaguely stated, if either of them, and of course Italy's like, me too, me too, me too, so Italy's part of this too, if any of them are attacked by or invaded by another nation, that the other two would join in. Which means, of course, in layman's terms, if the U.S. decides to go to war against either Hitler or Japan, the other one's going to join in, and there's no way the U.S. could fight both of them. Oh, and Italy. And Italy. There's no way we could fight them both. There's no way we could fight the three most powerful countries on Earth at the same time. That is another deterrent to keep the U.S. out of the war. So this is called the tripartite pact because it has three parts, right? Japan, Germany, and yes, Italy, they're there too. So they make this pact as a deterrent to us, so we don't think about joining the war because then we'd have to fight a three-frontal war, and there's no way we'd be prepared to do that. In November is the election, and Roosevelt does win. This is unprecedented, right? No other president has ever won a third term. His cousin Teddy did run for a third term, but lost because he split the Republican Party in last year's notes or book. So he does win. Now, part of his popularity is that America's in a much better place in 1940 economy-wise than it was when he took over in 1933. Like, we're not out of the Depression, but we're making progress. So that gives him, you know, a good boost in popularity, and the fact that he is trying to deter war is enough to win him the election. It's not as big a landslide as 1936, where he took every state but two, but it's still a pretty big landslide. So he wins pretty easily for his third term. But now that he has won, in December, before the new Congress takes over, he goes to Congress and says, hey, we got to do something else about England. Like, they're dying. They're the only ones fighting Hitler, and they're just getting, you know, they're getting hurt over there. We got to do something for them. The Congress is like, I know, but what can we do? You know, our hands are kind of tied because we're not really in danger. So Roosevelt's like, okay, so trade is one thing, right? You trade, you get something in return, all this. What about this? And this passes both houses of Congress, and he signs it. It's called the, think about the name, Lend-Lease. Like when you lend someone 20 bucks, you're expecting they're going to pay you back. It's not a trade. It's not a sale. When you lease something, that means you're renting it out. Like you rent an apartment, you're going to give it back. Not trade and not a sale. So we create the Lend-Lease policy. Now technically the Lend-Lease policy does say that the United States could lend or lease weapons to any country at war to protect the United States. That's kind of in there as well. But we can lend or lease weapons. So as soon as it passes Congress, Roosevelt's on the phone to England like, man, what do you need? Anything you need? What do you need? Grenades? What do you got? And England's like, we're dying over here. We need everything you can send us. And Roosevelt's like, it's on its way. Hello? Hello? Yes, East Germany. So Hitler's like, so I hear you're like in the new like lending and leasing thing now. You know, we could really use that. You know, we're fighting England over here. We could absolutely, you know, borrow some. We'll give it back. Great shape. We'll take care of it. We'll give it back. And you know, Roosevelt's like, oh, yeah. We already lent out like all the weapons we could spare. We don't have any. And Hitler's like, oh, yeah. You're still neutral, right? Oh, yeah. The United States does not choose sides. Yeah. Now we get to 1941. In the spring, U.S. military ships begin escorting U.S. merchant ships in the Atlantic. So for example, Miss Arango and her Arango Mango Company, I'm going to sell my chairs to, say, France. Well, not France. France has fallen to Germany. To Spain, which is neutral in this war, by the way. So I'm going to sell my ships, I'm going to take my ship and sell my chairs to Spain. So I leave Boston Harbor, and I've got these two giant, like, U.S. naval destroyers on each side of me. They're like, we're here to escort you and make sure you make it safely. And I'm like, you're cute, okay. So I leave with my bodyguards. I get to Spain, I do my trade, and then on the way back, my bodyguards like fall behind, and then they stay there, and then I come back alone. And next month, it's repeated. I leave Boston Harbor with two new battleships as my bodyguards. I get to do my business, and then on the way home from Europe, the ships stay behind. Now, these ships that are staying behind in the European area, the U.S. says they're there just in case. unescorted ships may run into trouble, and that's why they're staying behind. So you're Hitler, and you're only fighting one country right now, and that's England. And the United States has given England weapons, any kind of weapons that they want, and they won't trade with you. The U.S. is building an army, saying that it's a deterrent, but building an army and now positioning their navy all around Germany. So, I mean, Hitler's not dumb. Like, he's like, okay, blatantly, the U.S. has chosen sides. I mean, I think everyone in the world kind of figured that. But they're also prepping for war. Like, it's obvious that that's what's going on. So, Hitler's a little concerned, because his next target is the USSR. And he will invade the USSR in June of 1941. Bless you. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to invade the USSR. But he was concerned with America, that America would join this war before he was ready. And he has to take down Moscow, which is the capital of the USSR, by winter, which is December. If the blizzards come before he's ready, or before they finish, then his tanks won't work, his machine guns won't work. So he has to take down Moscow by December. So he is on a time schedule, or he'll have to wait until late spring. And he doesn't want to wait a year. If he waits a year, America could be in the war by then. So he needs to take Russia down now. I mean, he is so unprepared for this. At one point, he's sending in 1,000 horses. Horses! Horses! We've got tanks and grenades, and they're like, we got horses. All right? But he's desperate. He knows he has to move hard and fast to take down the USSR. I mean, the USSR is massive, largest country on Earth at the time. It's not like taking like Belgium. All right? Belgium fell pretty fast. The USSR can take much longer. It's going to take him longer to even get to Moscow. So he invades in June of 1941. And the USSR is like, nah! You know, I thought we were friends. Maybe never really fully trusting Hitler. All right? But they're also not prepared for the war machine Hitler's created. Even though Hitler's got horses too. They still have tanks and machine guns and all of that. And so Russia is struggling. So we call Stalin. We don't even like Stalin. We call Stalin. We're like, hey, yo, Joe. His name's Joe. Joe Stalin. Yo, Joe. We got this thing called the Lend-Lease policy. Is there anything you need? And Stalin's like, yes, I can use it. And we're like, all right, it's on its way. So we extend Lend-Lease to the Russians. So, hello? Yeah, is Hitler? Just saying. Clearly you found some more weapons because you lent them to the Russians. So you lent them to the British that I'm fighting, and you lent them to the Russians that I'm fighting. So I'm just saying. If you got any extra weapons, I sure would like to rent them for you. And Roosevelt's like, oh, you know what? Bad timing. Like, see, we just got these weapons and lent them to Russia. Just good timing, and then now we don't have any more. I don't think we were actually that nice about it this time. But Hitler gets it. Like, all right, fine. But his plan, he's got to take Russia down by December. All right, so we extend the Lend-Lease. Now, we have been so focused on what is happening in Europe. I mean, we really have. It's really, our ships have been escorting, vessels like mine but we haven't into Japan. Like, Japan is launching this incredibly aggressive war in Asia. Incredibly aggressive. Thousands just slaughtering people. And no American ship is being escorted over there. So if I wanted to trade with any country over there, I'm like on my own, like trying to avoid the Japanese, because that's not a concern. So we've been ignoring what Japan is doing, even though they are aggressively taking over all of the islands in the South Pacific and North Pacific, and they've taken Korea, and they've taken much of China, and they moved, all around. We haven't been really focusing on them, but July changes everything. It changes the course of the war for the U.S. So in July of 1941, Japan invades Vietnam. And I know it sounds odd that this freaked Roosevelt out. Like, he wasn't freaked out when they invaded China. He's freaked out when they invade Vietnam. Like, wow, Miss Arango, we're tight with Vietnam. No, most Americans never even knew where it was. It had nothing to do with that. I'm going to draw you a really terrible map that I'm so glad is not on YouTube. All right, so here's Asia. Looks just like that. Whoa. All right. Just squint. All right, so Vietnam is this really long, skinny country here. You have China and Japan. It looks just like this. All right, so here's the concern. It's not that. Okay, yeah, I just got back. All right, so they took over Vietnam. Here's our concern. This is why Roosevelt is. This is why Roosevelt is freaking out about Vietnam. It's because if you look at Japan's pattern, it's heading south. So if they continue this pattern and they head south from Vietnam, they will hit the Philippines, which is U.S. soil. At the time, we owned the Philippines. So suddenly, the real threat to the U.S. is not Hitler. It is Japan. And that changes everything. Roosevelt's like, Japan needs to be stopped now. So he calls Japan and says, that's the last straw. You're done. We are not going to sell you any oil or any steel until you pull out of Southeast Asia. And Japan's like, oh, I didn't know Vietnam was like so special to you. Like, all right, you want us to pull out of Vietnam? And Roosevelt's like, oh, no. Not just Vietnam, all of Southeast Asia, including China. And Japan's like, wait, you want us to leave China? You know, you could have told us that in 1937 when we invaded them. So that's the point. We gave them, Japan, an ultimatum we knew they wouldn't take so that we could freeze oil and steel sales to Japan to keep them from, I mean, without our oil, they can't, fuel their ships or their planes. Japan has no other oil or steel. So we knew this would deter them. We knew this would stop them. The hope is that it would keep them contained where they were now until we could figure out something else. So we gave them an ultimatum we knew they couldn't take. We know they're not going to get out of all of Southeast Asia. So Japan is very, very angry with this, but it's done. All right. So now we suddenly realize we need to focus on what's going on in Japan. What have they been doing? We need to get our military strategists. What do you think the odds are? Blah 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 blah. So while we're doing that, in September, a German U-boat torpedoes and destroys the USS Greer, which is one of those ships that was left behind to kind of just in case. It was sunk by and destroyed by a German U-boat. Hitler was so angry. Why would you do that? It's like beckoning America to join this war. And the captain was like, what did you expect me to do? The captain of the USS Greer, the American captain, was on his radio to the British Royal Navy going, hey guys, do you want to know where the German U-boats are? Let me give you their position so you can come destroy them. And the captain of the German U-boat was like, we're not going to let them give away our position. So we had one option, and that was destroy them before they could finish the transmission. And it's done. I mean, there's nothing you can do. You can't take it back. So Hitler was like, do not do that again. But Roosevelt was like, that was an attack on a U.S. ship in international waters. From this point on, and this was his order to his Navy, if you see a German U-boat, sink it on sight. Technically, we're still neutral, but this is justified. They attacked an American ship in international waters. Yes, we were giving away their position, but they attacked an American ship. So now we're like, oh, Germany. Okay. Then everything changes in November. We discovered two very disturbing things pretty close together. The first one is a Japanese task force. Now that is an attack force, so it's not an invasion force. They're not carrying troops and tanks and things like that. They're aircraft carriers carrying airplanes. So they're going to attack something, heading east from Japan. So they're heading this way. So you understand, there's nothing out there. There's water and Hawaii. So they're either going to attack the water, or they're going to attack Hawaii.
Or California.
Yeah, it's too far. I don't think their carriers could make it quite that far on the amount of oil we have, because we're not selling it to them. Alaska's a possibility, but they're heading a little too south to go to Alaska. So they're heading towards the direction of Hawaii, which is disturbing, but it's an attack force. Like, why would they attack Hawaii? Like, it really didn't make sense until we discovered the second thing, which was much bigger. And that was a massive Japanese convoy. This is an invasion force. Fleets of ships carrying tanks and troops. I mean, they're going to invade something. And they're heading south through the South China Sea. So they're heading this way. Now, we can't prove that they're going to the Philippines, because they may just, hug Europe and go attack India, which was British soil at the time, which then, I mean, considering Japan and Hitler were friends. Oh, did it start again?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. Considering Japan and Hitler were friends, it could have made sense. But we have to prepare for the fact that they very likely could be going to invade the Philippines. So Roosevelt's got all of his military strategies, and he's like, what is their play? Like, what are they going to do? Everyone believed this is what's going to happen. This is logical. Militarily, it made sense. This is what we believed 100% was going to happen. We believed the Japanese were going to invade the Philippines. So we believed the attack was going to come on the Philippines. When that happened, we would deploy our backup reinforcements from Hawaii to go there. Our battleships plus our other ships carrying U.S. soldiers that we have stationed in Hawaii. We would then send them. Our belief then was the purpose of the task force, why Japan has those airplanes up there, was so that once they invaded the Philippines and we deployed our vessels, the purpose of this task force, which is all airplanes, would be then to bomb and destroy all of our ships before they could make it to the Philippines. We all believed that, 100% that's what was going to go down. So we called the Philippines and warned them you're about to be invaded. And General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of the U.S. Army down in the Philippines, was like, oh, we are so not prepared. Like, you do not even understand how not prepared we are for this. And Roosevelt's like, they're already on their way. Do what you can. And so MacArthur's like, all right. So he begins recruiting Filipinos. Now, you got to understand, the Filipinos don't really like being under American rule, but they absolutely do not want to be under Japanese rule. They're hearing horror stories, which are all true, of how the Japanese are treating the Chinese that they're capturing. And they're like, we do not want to be under Japanese rule. So tens of thousands of Filipinos join. We don't have much time to train them. All right, but at least they're more than what we have now. But the invasion force is coming. Pearl Harbor was also warned, not about them being attacked, about what they expected to happen in the Philippines and that they would have to be able to be deployed rapidly. So they started having drills every day. Get to your battle stations, get on the ship. How fast would it take you to get out of the harbor? They started having drills for their pilots. Because what's going to happen is once we deploy our battleships and our reinforcements, they're going to send their task force to try and destroy them. So our pilots are going to have to fly and try to destroy their task force in the air. So our pilots started having drills of how can we get in the air fast. So they figured, and this is after many runs, that if they parked their planes one right behind the other, they could take off really fast. Like the first is really, really, really fast. So they're having drills like, 3 in the afternoon, then tomorrow would be at like 10 in the morning, and they keep having these drills, and the air raid signal will go off, and we know what that means. It means the Philippines have been invaded, and we have to get ready. So, you understand, everyone's surprised when on that fateful Sunday morning of December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor first. They hit Pearl Harbor. They hit the base. So they wiped out our battleships. They destroyed our airplanes, and we were so nice, we lined them up for them, one right after the other. It's like bowling. They just went, and they were gone. Almost 2,000 dead. And then 10 hours later, they invade the Philippines. And now we've got no reinforcements coming. Brilliant.
But you said how much later?
How much later? 10 hours.
10 hours.
10 hours later. So that's what happens. That took us so by surprise. If I had more time, we'd talk about the USS Arizona and all those other things, but we don't. So it happens just before 8 o'clock in the morning Hawaii time. They do bomb for 2 hours. That would be about 1 in the afternoon to 3 in the afternoon DC time, and then about 11 in the afternoon or 11 in the evening DC time is when the Philippines are invaded. So the next morning on December 8th, Roosevelt goes to Congress. That's when he makes his very famous yesterday, Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. The United States was deliberately attacked by the Empire of Japan. And then he's like, you don't understand, like, we had Japanese ambassadors in the White House the day before talking about how they wanted peace. They gave us a peace medal. When they were plotting this, we were so angry, they stabbed us in the back, pretending to want peace while plotting this. FYI, later we'll find out they actually built a mock Pearl Harbor a year ago. And have been doing these for a year practicing. That's why it was so effective. All right. So that next morning on December 8th, Congress will vote on it. You can imagine it only took 40 minutes to get 400 plus members of Congress to vote on this. Absolutely, we're going to war against Japan. The declaration of war is against Japan. That's who deserves our we got to go take care of this. But then let me just bring you back to this. If one of these countries is invaded or attacked by someone, the other two will join in. So 3 days later, on December 11th, Germany and Italy declare war on the U.S. So we reciprocate. So now exactly what we were afraid of has happened. We have to go to war against all three of them.
So the December 8th date is when
We declare war on Japan,
okay.
and on December 11th, Germany and Italy declare war on us. And we reciprocate. So we're going to talk about the actual war tomorrow. So us actually, what our strategies are, how we're going to deal with both of these nations. We're going to start dealing with that tomorrow. We're going to take a little side trip real quick to talk about what happens here in America after Pearl Harbor for the next 4 years, Americans during World War II. So you do understand this is going to require a much stronger military force than we've ever seen for any war ever. All right, we have 3 nations that we have to fight. It's going to be huge. So there are going to be over 16 million men that are going to be drafted and enlist in this war that are going to be fighting. That is a huge number. It's huge. I mean, World War I was 4 million. This one is 4 times that. So it's a huge number of men. Every single family is affected by this. All of you would be. Many of my boys in this class, you would be getting draft notices because you're 18. As soon as you're out of high school, they'll start coming in the mail. Your older brothers, your dads, for some of you who have younger fathers, or enlisted fathers who are inactive, could be called into active service. It'll affect all of us. And if it doesn't affect you there, it is going to affect you here at home because every part of our lives is affected. We don't have enough steel to make what we're going to make. We don't have enough oil. Everything will be rationed. Even your coffee will be rationed. You're all like, oh. But yes, who needs it? You, I know you're all, yeah, I need it. Or the soldiers fighting Hitler. It's like we have to ration. We only have X amount of everything. And so it affects every American family. Now, for my ladies in the class, a lot of you are going to be deeply affected by this. Your boyfriend's drafted, your older brother's at war, maybe both your brothers were drafted into the war. You want to do your part too. Obviously, you can't be drafted, nor can you go into active fighting. But the Army learned from World War I how important the role of women is in the military during war. They can do all the jobs that are non-combat so that all the men drafted can be sent to combat. So the Army created a whole separate branch just for women. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or the Women's Auxiliary Corps, is a whole separate branch of the U.S. military just for women. Hundreds of thousands of women they're recruiting. It worked so well that Roosevelt ordered the Navy do it too. The Navy absolutely did not want to do it, but they were ordered to do it. So those are the waves. For minorities, we need everyone. You are going to have well over 1 million blacks who are either drafted or enlist, not in unusual numbers, like we will get to Vietnam. That's going to be a whole different story. For a lot of Hispanic Americans, the discrimination they faced during the Great Depression, this is their way of proving the loyalty to America, was by enlisting in the war. Japanese Americans. Now, you got to understand, Japan stabbed us in the back. You cannot trust Japanese Americans. So when you have all these American-born Japanese who went to enlist, they were like, we do not allow Japanese Americans into our military. No one, black, white, Hispanic, wants to serve next to a Japanese American. That will change by the end of the war, and we will allow some Japanese Americans into our forces. Again, no one wants to fight by them. So they had to be segregated into their own units. And they will be sent only to fight Hitler. We will not deploy them to fight Japan. We don't want Japan to turn them. So that will happen. So you do see very multicultural, all right, military that we have going on. Blacks are still segregated, by the way, in the military at this point. It is after this war that will change. However, Roosevelt feels like he really doesn't know if, like, Congress understands, like, this war and what needs to be done. So he has a law passed, and he's got members of his party on his side to do it, called the War Powers Act. The Republicans adamantly refuse to pass it, and even some Democrats refuse to pass it as well, but it will pass. It gives the executive branch, meaning the president, the authority to create any organization he needs to for this war. Creating organizations like Homeland Security or the FBI or whatever is the job of Congress. So this technically takes the job away from Congress and puts it in the hands of the president, which puts the direction this war is going to go in America pretty exclusively in the hands of the president. It's a lot of power for one person to have. And it leads to his whole, like, part of his whole dictatorship, like people accused him of things. But it's done. All right. I want to tell you the plan. This is the plan. It is what works. It is the reason why we won the war. It is the one reason why we won the war. His plan is brilliant and it will work. The plan is to outproduce the enemy. And as you're writing it down, let me explain. Okay, how many planes does Hitler have? He has 300,000, then we'll build 400,000. How many battleships does Japan have? They have 200,000, we'll build 700. They have 2,000, we'll build 7,000. How many machine guns do you think I have? They have like, what, 20 million? Okay, we'll build 40 million. How many bullets? We'll build 5 billion. Whatever they have, we'll build more. Because as we're fighting, they will run out of resources and ours will just keep coming. We will outproduce the enemy. It is why we win. We produce everything you can possibly think of in record numbers. Blood, you can't produce blood. We can donate it in record number. Oh, well, you know, our people on the field, they're going to get injured. They're going to need false limbs. We'll produce them in record number. Anything you can think of, medicine, record number. Everything in record number. Far more than all 3 of our countries that we're fighting put together. That's the plan. It works very effectively. We will outproduce all of them. Japan will run out of sources, so will Hitler. And ours just keep coming. Which means every single factory that was shut down during the Great Depression needs to reopen tomorrow. We don't need that many cars made in America for the next couple of years. So Henry Ford's company, the Ford Motor Company, instead of producing cars, we need bombers. We need airplanes. We need ships. We need everything you can think of. Our factories need to start producing war material. So, I need 7 million workers tomorrow. Perfect timing, right? Great Depression. 7 million, let's go. And of course you're like, hey man, I've been living in a cardboard box for 3 years. Yeah, I'll take a job. Absolutely. And so all of these huge plants, all the Ford Motor Company, all their plants, instead of producing cars, they're going to start producing, bombers, and they start producing machine guns, and they're starting to producing, tanks and all of these things. We run into a problem. The problem is the way an assembly line works, each person has a specific job. You do that same job every day for 8 to 10 hours a day, you become really good at your job, much faster than anyone else. And that's true of every person on the assembly line. So we're like cranking out these planes, and then that guy gets drafted. So I have to hire someone to replace him, and that guy, not his fault, he's just slower because he hasn't been doing it for the past 2 months. So by the time he starts picking up steam, this guy's drafted, and then that guy's drafted, and it slows down production. Finally, companies realize that women can't be drafted. If you hire all women on the assembly line, they will get just as good at the job, they'll be really fast at it, and none of them can be drafted, which will speed up production, which means the company gets paid more, which means the government has the weapons that they need to fight the enemy. So we have to recruit women. Problem is, these jobs are not easy jobs. You're lifting sheet metal. You're riveting. Riveting guns are like jackhammers. They're incredibly heavy. And these are all jobs that were always considered, oh no, women can't do those jobs. They're not feminine jobs. Those are men's jobs. So how do you convince women then, like, oh, just kidding, you really can do this job? And women are like, but, I've always been told that I can't do that. What if I'm not strong enough? That's when all the posters had to come out to encourage women, like, yes, you can. I know you've seen the yes, you can posters. To encourage women that, of course, yes, you can. Yeah, I know we said that, but we didn't mean it. All right, those are the Rosie the Riveter posters. War production does end the Great Depression. Like, if you seriously are in World War II and you don't have a job, it's because you don't want one. They're everywhere. Everywhere. Like, if you're like, I ain't got no job, that's on you. You be lazy. All right. However, paying for this is going to be tough. You're talking over 16 million, in addition to the women, workers in the military, and every single one of these 7,000 battleships, and the 300,000 airplanes, and the 70,000 tanks that we're building. All of that costs money. This war is not cheap. So they had to raise taxes, including income taxes. But of course, you've been living in a cardboard box for 3 years with no job. So the fact that, oh, I have a job, but they're taking taxes, you're not going to complain. All right? And it's for the war. Your brother was drafted. Your father was drafted. Your son. So Americans are okay with this. But the biggest way the government made money was through something called war bonds. We learned this in a big way in World War I. So I have a job, and I'm working in my factory, and when I get off, I get paid, and I go straight to the post office, which is a government agency, and I'm like, I want to buy a $100 war bond. So you give them $100 for them to use for the war, and they give you a $100 war bond. Once the war is over, I can cash in my war bond for $100 plus interest. But I can hold on to it. It's still making interest. for up to 50 years. So the war is over. People were concerned all these jobs would go away and we'll slump back into a Great Depression. So people saw the war bonds as an investment. Like every paycheck, I'm going to go buy some war bonds. So at the end of the war, if I lose my job, I got these war bonds and I can stagger them. And that'll keep me going until I find a job. Americans spend $100 billion on war bonds to help try to pay for this war. And it's still not enough. This war is so expensive. Want to take a guess how much it costs per day for America to fight this war? $10 million a day. It's a lot. $250 million a day. We're in the war for 4 years. Feel free to pull out your calculator and go, holy crap, yeah. That's it. $250 million per day to fight this war. That Americans spent in this war.
How long were we?
4 years. It's a lot of money. All right, but if America's not on board with this war, then they're not going to buy the war bonds. They're not going to support this war. We need America on board. So all the propaganda that the government puts out is going to be all about supporting this war. So for example, we need to ration things like gasoline. So carpooling becomes really important to the cause, right? You want to help people, like you want to help, save Germany. You want to help save people from Germany's aggression. You guys gotta ride together to school. Conserve gas, because that will help the war effort. So I have to show you my favorite propaganda. Has a car with a guy driving by himself. And in the passenger seat is like the shadow of Hitler.
Oh.
And it says, when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. Okay. All right, we got to hurry because we don't have much time. All right. So we have one last little problem we do have to take care of, and it is a problem. And that is, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese submarines are spotted off the coast of California. Now, of course, we know why they're there. Logically, it would be because they're checking out our military. However, what we believed at the time is the reason the Japanese subs were there, and this is the rumor, that they were there in communication with Japanese spies in California. Most Japanese Americans lived in California. That's the rumor that spread, and when it hit D.C. and Roosevelt heard the rumor, he's like, it stops now. And he issues probably the most controversial executive order ever with Executive Order number 9066. And that is basically authorizing the Army to take care of this Japanese-American threat. And the Army's like, seriously? How are we going to do that? There's like 150,000 Japanese Americans. We can't, put a tail on every one of them, monitor every phone call they make. The only logical way to keep an eye on every Japanese American is to round them up, put them in camps so we can monitor all their activity. So we build relocation centers that are known as internment camps. If you were Japanese American, it'd be a knock on the door. It is the U.S. Army with a bus outside saying you're being relocated, pack a bag. All right, you pack a bag, say goodbye to your house, you're never going to see it again. In the bus you go off to the relocation center. And it reminded a lot of people of what does happen in the Holocaust to the Jews, except you're not taken to a labor camp where you will then die. But you are taken to what is basically a jail because you are Japanese American, even American born, but of Japanese descent. Now, isn't that a violation of your civil rights? Absolutely. So one of them, well actually several of them, decide to sue. The one that ends up in the Supreme Court is Korematsu versus the U.S. Now, he is American-born Japanese who was sent to a relocation center, and he was like, this is a violation of my American civil rights. I'm American. And it went to the Supreme Court. Now, if the Supreme Court rules that Executive Order 9066 is unconstitutional, every internment camp has to release their inmates. But I think you all pretty much already know this. The Supreme Court upheld it, saying in times of war, your civil rights can indeed be revoked, and that has been proven more than once. Just FYI, it is of course still true in times of war. So if we are at war and they decide to suspend civil rights of a particular group, it would probably be upheld by the Supreme Court by precedent. So that happens, and then tomorrow we get into what happens in war. So tomorrow we're going to start with, now we got these 3 countries, what is our strategy going to be? You have like a minute and 10 seconds. Questions I can answer. Yes?
The rumors, what exactly were
The rumors were that the Japanese were talking to Japanese spies. The Japanese subs were talking to Japanese spies.
in America?
In America, in California. Did you stop it?
No, it's still going.
Oh, can you stop it? Yeah.